Welcome to Lessons Learned with the Community Ladies, sponsored by Healthy Communities Coalition. Thank you for joining us. I am very excited to see an old friend I haven't seen in a very long time. This is the Reverend Dr. Kevin Slayton. Welcome.
Edie, how are you? Thank you for the invitation. It is equally a pleasure on my side to see you as well.
Well, all is well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So Kevin, I promise I won't keep you long. Can you please share with everyone, all the viewers, sort of a little background about yourself and your work in the community, just sort of where you started to where you are now?
Great. Well, I am pastor. I pastor. I didn't start out in ministry. I started in need of ministry because, like most folks, I was raised in the church, but I did my own thing. And then naturally, I was sort of unable to shake what we refer to as a calling into ministry. But by that time, I had several years under my belt in political advocacy, social justice advocacy, working for the Public Justice Center, Associated Black Charities, and a stint interning on Capitol Hill and the national NAACP headquarters here in Baltimore. Ultimately, I ended up starting my own lobby practice in 2005, and I worked with Associated Black Charities, Living Classrooms, just a number of progressive Maryland, a lot of groups that were doing advocacy work, fighting, rah, rah, rah.
And a good fight.
And I enjoyed that. And then there was a shift around 2009 or 10, and most of my clients were not so much concerned privately about the issues in the forefront as they were about how do I get myself in the budget? How do I, get money? And I learned, early on that, that was all about relationships. And that was relatively easy because, if the relationships were strong, you had the commitments, you just pretty much waited on the legislative process, made your proposal, you had your person who was going to carry your idea, and you got, ultimately you got something. You always ask for more, and then you get a little bit, that became easy. So I began to lose the passion. Around that time, this calling for ministry was getting stronger, and I couldn't, as they say, I couldn't run no more. So I was in seminary at Howard University, one of the great schools on the planet, got ordained, went into ministry, and was trying to figure out how do I blend the two because they got it. And as God works, there was a transition in city leadership from one mayor to the next. And I was asked to come work with the other. I said, well, I'm not doing politics anymore. And they were like, well, you're going to be our faith advisor. I'm like, what in the hell is that? So I figured it out. So I was back in it. And there I was, sort of combining my love of God and ministry with the relationships I built within the community.
Wow. And
there was no escaping it. And so to this day, I pastor a church, but I also have a day job. I do political work still with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. And to the point that I began this conversation, the reason I took this particular work is I recognize that the legislative process here in Maryland was for 90 days. They can't leave that space until they do one thing. That's balance the budget. And so there's a rapper, I'm sure you don't know this rapper, by the name of T.I. He has this song that says, if it ain't about the money, it ain't about nothing. The 90 days is about the money.
Okay.
So one of the projects I had to do for a class was I looked at this report that comes out at the end of every legislative session by the local newspaper, the Baltimore Sun. And it says, based on the past 90 days, these are the winners and losers. You remember that? It would come out, the winners and losers of the legislative session. And in that year, it said the winner was the African American church. And I was like, what the heck did we do? That was so hard.
Okay.
So I went and looked at the end of session report for the Maryland Catholic Conference. They do all the lobby work for the Maryland Conference at the legislative level. And they said that they had about a $2 billion impact on the overall legislative session, which was trying to balance a budget at that year for around $34 billion. They said they had a $2 billion impact, but they weren't listed as one of the groups that, was a winner. They weren't mentioned at all. And so I went to the Baltimore Jewish Council, the BJA. They have a group called the Associated, which is the Jewish arm of their advocacy, their lobby advocacy. They do an end of session report, and they said they had almost a $2 billion impact on a 34 billion.
Wow.
Like, Edie, what did the black church do
when
we were listed as winners? Turns out we were active in getting the name change on the airport to include Thurgood Marshall. So it's called BWI Thurgood Marshall. Well, that's when I had this sort of eye opener. Still today, people don't call it Thurgood Marshall. They still call it BWI. And the fiscal note attached to that, the money spent, was zero. So I realized we were getting our clocks cleaned in the legislative process because we didn't understand about the money. And so my work now with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy looks at the impact and the influence of tax and fiscal policy on communities of color. For example, we have been fighting this issue here about the legalization of marijuana. Well, I mean, none of us have to be experts on this. We all know somebody that got locked up from selling weed, buying weed, smoking weed, something with weed. Whole bunch of brothers and sisters got nickel bag cases.
Go ahead, come on. Oh my, Kevin, wow.
Now we give out 5 licenses in the state of Maryland. All 5 licenses went to white corporations. So they had to go back in the legislature and say, now does this look odd? They changed it out, and now we got 1 of the 5 is black. But it's backed by a predominantly white corporation. That's another story. But here we are now trying to figure out, what do we do with all these families that have been turned upside down for the last 40, 50 years for these weed charges on the street, and white boys and women are about to go out and become millionaires selling the same exact product?
It's the same thing happening here. Well, it's the same, the same thing happening here. And there are these coalitions forming, and people have to fight for, for these dispensaries to be owned by people of color. And it's like, wow. And then they have to fight to get the records expunged. I'm like, oh my.
We have proven we know how to sell the product. That's off the table.
It's our industry.
The economic piece is, now that the horse is out of the barn, the state is going to start taxing and receiving revenue. The same way we did when black folk in the neighborhood were selling numbers. Remember we called running numbers? They decided to take over, they call it state lottery. And now they fund, stadiums and all kinds of stuff, but black folk were demonized for doing that. In this case, we want to see the proceeds, a great deal, at least 50% of the generated revenue from the sale of cannabis, go to the communities that have been most devastated by that product. That's a whole new approach of combining my faith-based advocacy with my social justice advocacy. Yeah, I'm a preacher. I'm not, saying folks ought to go out and get high, but since they are getting high, let's make sure some of the money, comes back into the community.
Absolutely. It's like the casinos and all. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Oh my. So you have shared just so many gems, even in sharing your work and these experiences. So can you pull out some lessons learned, or did you plan to share a different lesson learned?
Lessons learned as it relates to social justice advocacy and faith communities specifically, is that we should not expect that faith communities are in a position to leverage any real resource or power. And so the lesson I've learned is that we have got to be more conscious about what it is we expect from politicians when they come through, when they cycle through our communities. So what I'm saying is every community, every city, every state, whatever, has a political cycle. And some of those cycles have experiences that are very unique to the African-American community. One of them is during that electoral cycle, they tend to come by our worship services on Sundays. They tend to come in and they come to sit down and do what they do. They never do that at mosques, synagogues, or temples.
Wow.
Primarily Protestant African-led congregations. They come, but they never ask for anything. They never offer anything. And that's because we never ask for anything. So the lesson I've learned, and we're doing it right now, I sent out a proposal last week, a memorandum of understanding to all of the candidates running for governor on the Democratic side. And I gave them a list of items that we wanted them to sign to before they got into office. One of them was, 50% of that cannabis resource goes back to the community. 31% of all your cabinet appointments to people not of color, but people who are Black, African American. We're being very specific. We're asking that if you have infrastructure dollars to the tune of some $3-4 billion coming down the pipeline from the federal government, one thing we've always cried about in this city is lead in the water. You go to any public school in Baltimore, the faucets are literally taped up with duct tape. And when you ask them to fix it, they say, oh, money doesn't fall out of a tree. If we had money, we have a wish list, we fix it. Well, now you've got it. So before you spend all the money and come back to us 5 years and say, oh, we didn't get around to that, commit to doing that. I'm not endorsing any of you until you commit to that. The lesson I've learned is that churches have to be more serious about the people that they serve in their pews. Wow. Don't just sort of sell them out because you may get some personal benefit. We have to be more practical. We have to be more politically savvy in how we engage. Because if you look over the history of this interaction, this relationship, and this dance, we have gotten nothing from the relationship, absolutely nothing.
It's hard. It's difficult for me to even sit still, because wow, it's so good. I mean, it's so good. And I thank you and I love you for being so consistent. I recall you as you're talking, I remember in conversations, similar to this, probably 10 years ago, or more. But I remember you saying to me, and it prompted a project. That's why I remember it clearly. But we were talking about candidates, the candidates who were running for office. And you basically were saying, well, what's our platform? Like, we don't even have a platform. And you were saying it doesn't matter who's in office if we don't have a platform, because if we get the platform, you give it to whoever is in office. And I was like, that makes sense. And it made me think about a report card for the community, just which was really an assessment of what needs to happen. And we tried hard to do that, but it was kind of difficult to get off the ground. But that's what this conversation is reminding me of, because it's so good. And if we were to, harness our power and harness the positions, of those who are, who have influence.
If you're on the south side of Chicago, and, the front runner for office has to get to your church. I'm thinking of my buddy up in who replaced Reginald Sharp. He's at Clay Evans Church, or Otis Moss. I know they do great work over at Trinity. But it could be any church ABC coming through. Even if you don't know what you want to ask for, say, hey, we've got 10 students here. Commit to scholarship for 10 of our students for your 4 years. You're there 4 years. Send 10 of our kids to 4 years. We send you there, send them here.
Absolutely.
But ask for something.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. Wow.
And that's the lesson I've learned. You have not because you ask not.
Because you have not. Have not because we ask not. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Reverend Slayton. This has been, it's been so good. I know I don't want it to go too much longer, and I promised I wouldn't keep you long, but this is just, it's so much to digest in what you've given. It's so much food for thought. And I pray that it actually, that it resonates.
I pray it will. So you're at a very active church, so I have no doubt that you guys are. And Chicago's a great city. I mean, some wonderful faith leaders there.
Yes, it is.
I just think it's time we start asking for what we want.
I love it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Well, do you have any final thoughts for us before I start wrapping up?
No, just start making your list, so that you're not, at the last minute trying to come up with something. But, be thoughtful about what it is you want. I mean, look around your community, see what is needed. These are government officials. They're spending government money. It's not their money, but at least you ask for it.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Reverend Slayton, for joining. Thank you all for watching. I pray that you have gotten, I pray that you've been as blessed as I have been in this lesson learned. Until next time, keep moving, keep doing, and keep shaking things up in your communities. Peace. All right.
Working in community, no place I'd rather be. Working in community, lifting, loving, setting free. Don't know where